This is A Silent War Within, the podcast dedicated to confronting the unseen mental health battles carried by our first responder and healthcare heroes. This show is about real stories, real struggles, and real ways to survive the storm and come out stronger on the other side. For too long, stigma has kept you silent, but this is your space to bravely break that silence, share vital insights, and build a community where your well-being truly comes first, because your service deserves unwavering support.
Welcome, everybody, to A Silent War Within. We're happy to have you here with us today, of course, as always. We have a very special guest. But first off, we've got our co-host, Kim. Kim, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Kevin?
Pretty good. We've got our Facebook up and running. We're working on a website design. We've got our TikTok. We've got all kind of places to find us. If you want to reach out to us via email, you can always do that at asilentwarwithin@gmail.com. For now, we're going to have independent email addresses up soon. It will be Kim at asilentwarwithin.com and then Kevin at asilentwarwithin.com as soon as we get that website launched, which will be coming in the next 30 days. We're excited about that. We're excited about all the things that's happening. There's a lot of great ideas rolling around in mine and Kim's head that we're still working on. We've got guests lined up all the way until November. We've had a really great response to this show, and we're really excited to get started with today's special guest. You may know him as EMS Avenger from TikTok, Facebook, all the places, but we know him as Jimmy Apple. Jimmy, how are you doing today?
Great. Glad to be here.
Good. Glad to have you with us. So everybody knows you as EMS Avenger, but outside of that, tell us about your background. Tell us about who Jimmy is, not just EMS Avenger. I know you're a passionate educator, but tell us about who the man Jimmy is.
That's an interesting question because not a lot of people ask that. They just kind of want to start out immediately with, well, how did you start doing your stuff on TikTok? I am originally from New Jersey. I grew up there, but I left when I was 18. I lived for 20 years in Wilmington, North Carolina. I have 3 kids, 3 grandkids. I am married, and I like to hike, and I particularly like very difficult hikes that kind of wear you out and require a lot of physical effort to actually get through it. I'm a little bit of a sci-fi fantasy nerd. I'm a very avid reader. I read on average 70 to 80 books a year, but I also am very much into EMS. It's very much a hobby as well as a career.
That is very evident in your work. So now you can tell us about EMS Avenger and kind of how that started, how that all kind of come about.
I've always wanted to do something forward-facing where I was in front of some sort of captive audience. I didn't know what that exactly looked like when I was a kid, but I knew I had the desire. So that could have been in the form of being an actor or a rock musician or something like that. But when I got into EMS and fell in love with the learning process and fell in love with kind of personalized education, not classroom education, I realized that might take the form of some sort of educational forum. At the time, I thought it was going to be a podcast, but once my daughters started sending me funny TikTok videos and I got on the app, I realized this is the thing right here. I can incept people with a minute of education as they're scrolling, doom scrolling on TikTok.
That's one of the things that I truly enjoy about your content is that it's kind of geared toward the ADHD among us a little bit. And I think we all have kind of a touch of that. Shade Tree Cardiology, when we interview him, talks about that a little bit. And that, that's a coming episode. We're always ahead of our recorded episode so that we have a lot of content waiting for you guys.
Greg and I are friends. He's a great guy.
Yeah, he is fantastic. We had an 1.5 hour long conversation with that guy and lasted longer than that, even after. He is definitely a talker, and I am too. So, it worked out. Was this all accidental? Did you get to this 70,000 follower mark that you're at now? Probably more by the time this releases. But did you intend to get there, or did you kind of do it as a side thing and just hope for the best?
Well, my goals were to just do what I was doing in hallways at the hospital and at the station and out in the parking lot or in our ambulances. My goal was to just have those conversations, but have them where more people could participate in it. People have always encouraged me to, they're like, you need to have a blog back when blog and Medium was the thing, or you need to have a podcast, or you need to have this, or you need to have that. And I just never found what the right niche was until the Reels format of social media became kind of the norm. But my goals were always just to take the conversations that I was having in front of what may have started a couple people, and then I realized that there was 15 people standing around me. So the goal was not world domination. The goal was accessibility. And, I say world domination jokingly. There's a very specific lane I exist in. You can easily get hundreds of thousands of followers just being funny and posting memes. I exist in a very specific lane, evidence-based medicine, and that has diminishing returns when you get to a certain number. But yeah, the goal really was just to make what I was doing accessible.
Do you think the short form video style had an impact, especially when you've kind of hit on a few topics throughout? I mean, you really mix it up. It's not 100% education. Some of it is talking about case reviews and things that you've done actually in practice. And I love that part of it, that you actually back some of this up with practice that you've had. Do you think that short form allows you to hit on numerous different topics? Like you've talked about burnout, you've talked about some PTSD things, you've talked about being broken. Do you think that short form is a good way for you to present those topics? Do you think it's helped you grow?
Has it helped me grow?
Well, grow on the platform and grow as an individual.
Well, both, yes. I think that in this day and age, people are not very well suited for the longer form of education. There are people that will sit in front of hours-long modules. I'm not one of them. If you're going to present something in video format, I want it to be digestible. If you want to publish a 50-page treatise on, metabolic acidosis, I'll read that, but I won't watch that. I think that the short form is kind of more attuned to the way people learn now. And I really like the concept of micro-learning, of getting packaged, explainable concepts to people just a little bit at a time. And I think that helps people over time. I think that when you introduce complex topics and introduce too much detail, that can numb people down. And even if they like what they're hearing, it may not be something they can carry into the next day. So I think that short form micro-learning is great. And as far as me growing as a person, this medium has absolutely done that. I committed to being respectful and responsive to the feedback that I get, whether it's well-intentioned or not. And I think that it has definitely molded me and helped me adapt to having a style and an accountability.
I think your short form's also a good way to help people understand without being completely overwhelmed by a topic. So I really appreciate the format that you provide to us, especially being short on time. Sometimes, if we get busy and have busy days, I can still find a minute or two to grab some new knowledge, even on shift, due to that format. So I think there's a lot of us that appreciate your work.
Sure. And I think that the looping back around to topics on a repeated basis is very helpful in that format too.
I have an off-topic question for you. I'm curious, seeing your background there in your office, studio, whatever you want to call it, did EMS Avenger, are you a Marvel fan? Is that where that come from?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been immersed within the nerd culture before that was actually something that was cool. When I was a kid, nerd culture didn't really exist, but, there were people that, like myself, who were into Marvel and Star Wars and, reading sci-fi and fantasy and that sort of thing. As I got to be older, I got into the Marvel movies, and my kids kind of like pushed me into the development of the identity of EMS Avenger, when as a family we were talking about me doing something online, and they're like, you should call yourself EMS Avenger, because I love the Avengers, and that was something that was popular at the time where I was starting to develop all this. And so it was a pretty organic process.
Yeah, I always notice so we've had Jimmy on the show before, and the take that we did then, he was our very first guest. He was the first one gracious enough to join us, and it didn't go quite like we had hoped. So I reached out and asked him if he would join us again. So this is actually take 2, but I noticed that Captain America shield behind you, and I just love the way your office is set up. So I just had to ask, because I'm nerdy before it was cool too. Growing up, I was into all of that stuff.
I'm waiting for someone to notice this book right here. And
I can't read what the name of it is. What is that book?
It's called How to Swear.
Yes.
I definitely got to get that.
Is it how to swear and not get fired, or just how to swear?
It just how to swear. It has all sorts of examples on how to use all of your favorite four letter words.
That's fantastic. I absolutely love that. So
We like to
obviously,
call them we like to call them sentence enhancers around here.
yeah, a little Cajun spice in your lingo from time to time.
Yeah. I used to inject my videos with a little bit of salty language, but as we progressed, it's become something that it was so infrequent that people were actually surprised when it happened. And so you kind of try to stick to a winning formula. I've always respected comedians that were able to be funny, and I'm not offended by profanity. I mean, when a camera is off, I'm as salty as anyone else, but I always respect the comedians who are able to be funny without it because they're essentially doing more with less, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the EMS Avenger thing has definitely worked for you.
It's one of my favorite topics, actually, and I think that you and I can probably both relate on this. I kind of live by the life motto of be the change and be the kindness that you want to see in the world, because I think that there's not enough of that, and the world could always use more. And in your videos, you highlight different aspects of EMS experience that relates with me and probably a lot of us, and it's being kind to our patients. And we also work in high stress environments that cause us to become kind of jaded or desensitized. We experience caretaker burnout. Life gets really stressful. How do you maintain the empathetic approach despite our working environments and high stress?
Well, a lot of it is through seeing how people were affected when I wasn't. Um, I can look back at calls where I was the worst version of myself. And when I sit there and think about how I behaved in those moments and actually allow myself a moment to reflect, I get that cringe sensation in my chest. You know, I think it's good to look back and highlight some moments when you were at your worst in order to have something to fall back on, in order to create a trajectory towards being your best. I can remember being in EMS just a couple of years, and we responded to a respiratory arrest. And I mean, we all had Narcan, and we are aware of, the potential for opioid overdoses and this sort of thing, but it just wasn't as prevalent in your mindset. This is 20 years ago. And so we had this guy in respiratory arrest, no reported history of drug use or anything like that. So we're just kind of like working on a respiratory side of things, but someone in the background, I think it was the patient's mother, kind of got in there and started holding the patient and kind of rocking back and forth and moaning. And it was at the time, it was annoying. We're trying to work a problem, and we hadn't arrived at a Narcan solution yet. And so we're just kind of talking amongst each other and doing different therapies. And here's this mother just kind of like moaning and crying. And I started thinking about myself instead of what she was going through. Her son wasn't breathing, and I just went, "Ma'am, can you stop that, please?" And we just kept going. And I can remember seeing a corner of my eye, one of the team members looking at me, and if you could just if there were subtitles to a look, it would have been, "What a dick," And people told me afterwards, they're like, "That was one of the most asshole things I've ever seen somebody do." And these are moments that I didn't want to be defined by. And so anytime I've had a moment like that, I've reflected and thought there's just has to be a better way. And I just started, it coincided with, I hope this answer isn't getting too long-winded, but it coincided with a meme that I saw on Facebook that said, "Challenge yourself to not complain for 24 hours." And I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting challenge." And so I didn't complain for 24 hours. After 24 hours, I was like, that wasn't long enough to be a real social experiment. So I did it for 48 hours. Then I did it for a week, and then I did it for a month. And I was like, what if I just had an attitude of not complaining? And both of these points of self-reflection converged. And I realized that when you're at your best behavior, you just reinforce the best version of yourself. You feel better, but you also impact the world and you make the world better. And I really think that it's something that we need to return to as a profession, as far as being the best example of public service.
I think there's a lot of truth to what you said. And I think that listeners, myself, Kim, I think that we all can hear that message and kind of write it off, because we hear about kindness from numerous different outlets on a daily, whether it's Facebook or TikTok or wherever you're getting your media from. But I think that the important part that I pick out of that story is using our own examples, because we've all been the worst version of ourselves. I certainly have got a plethora of stories that where I was not my best self. And I've told this before, but my very last evaluation before coming off of the truck into dispatch, because I've gone through paramedic into dispatch, into a supervisor position, now into a higher up leader role. One of the things that my boss at the time asked me in my very last yearly evaluation was, do you know how many times you've told me to F off this year? And I was like, no, I didn't keep account. And he immediately said 37. And it was at that moment I realized I was not my best self. And I think we talked about this in a previous episode, or maybe an episode we recorded, but Kim and my close friends, Kim and I have worked together for the last 10 years, and they started to notice that I wasn't my best self. There was something wrong with me. There was something wrong with my outlook on life. That was from a conglomeration of things, if you will, that, pushed me into that negative mentality that I had, and I took it out on everybody around me. And I think that was part of my brokenness shining through. And you've talked about some of the brokenness in some of your videos, and kind of that particular video and that particular set of videos where you mentioned broken people. It very much resonates with me. It very much caused me a lot of thought. Did you feel different? I guess the better question is, how long did it take you to feel different when you're not complaining, when you're not focusing on the negative, when you're not focusing on that brokenness that you talk about? How long did it start to take you to feel the difference in your day-to-day life?
I mean, that's like asking how long did it take you to grow up? I mean,
yeah,
I am in the process of, just like everyone else is, of doing what you ask. It is a work in progress. I would say that there has been a very sharp trajectory since I've been on social media, simply by seeing the effects of what I do. With the first probably year and a half of doing this, I was capable of putting out some very salty reply videos to people. Some people really liked that. A lot of people really didn't. And I started to see a trend that people really respected when I could reply to somebody with a kind attitude and with a courtesy, even if they weren't replying to me with that attitude or even replying to me in good faith. And at one point or another, I just realized, it just pays off to be kind. People like it. And not only that, but kindness is kind of a repellent to toxicity as well. When I look at my engagement, I really don't get a lot of toxic engagement. And that's because it can't thrive in an environment where you are attempting to be positive and kind. That toxicity cannot thrive there. There is no fuel for it. And so the people who attempt to engage like that, there's just no oxygen for them to breathe around me when they're like that. But the last year and a half has been a very sharp learning curve on the kindness, and something where I've really purposefully developed the concept of building kindness into your care.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I can recall we had a patient that was highly intoxicated and just belligerent, and I was just mean. I was just downright mean because he was intoxicated and belligerent and just a pain, to be honest. When in that situation, I can look back and see that I should have shown a little kindness, and that would have diffused some of the situation, because a lot of what I was saying, he was rebuttaling to, of course, because we're basically in an argument at this point, whether you're going to the hospital or you're not going to the hospital. I'm going to do this. No, you're not. This kind of back and forth thing. And I was just downright mean. And it's one of those times that I'll look back and I go, that could have been handled completely differently. And I think that we all have those pieces of our lives that we can look back, or those situations in our lives we can look back at and see that, man, we fumbled that one really, really well. And I found the same way that you have, and mine has been a little different path. Mine's been more through leadership, that kindness takes away the fuel for that fire of negativity. When people are just hitting you and hitting you and hitting you, it's just so much easier to just be kind. And that all kind of goes away because they have no rebuttal to kindness. There's not really a lot you can say. And we deal with the wildfire of negativity a lot. Kim and I were just talking about it before we came on. So I think that resonates with us today, this morning, at this very moment, probably more than anything.
Yeah. I want to add too that in the face of somebody challenging you to be kind, that there are, a lot of resistors out there to that message. And some of the pushback that I've heard on that is just, I can't even relate to the world they live in as far as justifying their attitudes. And I'm not going to get too deep into it, but when I hear it, I'm like, I don't even understand living in this mindset of defending toxic behavior. But I want to say to the people who are resistant to this, there are opportunities that come your way every day where you can make a decision to be a better person. And when you resist those opportunities and you double down, and with the I am who I am, either take it or leave it sort of nonsense, these opportunities at one point or another, you won't even be aware of the opportunities anymore. You will be too far deep in your own neuroses. And I just encourage everyone, at any moment in time, somebody offers you an opportunity, directly or indirectly, to just be a better person. Take it. Just take that road. It costs you nothing.
I think one thing that I've learned with age, I used to be a pretty reactive person. In my 20s and early 30s, I would allow myself to become flustered at what other people would do. And I would get frustrated because in my logic, I would think, if only they would do this, if only they would do that. And the only thing that I have noticed in age is the only thing I can control is me, my reactions and my response. I can't control what other people do. And so if I choose to have a positive attitude and I choose and wake up every day and be intentional and tell myself and remind myself, today I'm going to be happy and today I'm going to choose joy and positivity. If I keep that demeanor and continue that demeanor throughout the day, regardless of what's said to me, you become unaffected. And I think
Yes.
it's important to learn that lesson. Like, we can't control other people. Unfortunately, I know sometimes we wish we could, but we can control us.
Yeah. And our entire career in EMS and in healthcare is centered in the notion, in the concept of a loss of control, whether it be a loss of control of something physiological or the loss of control over something neurological or psychological, but it all has to do with a loss of control. And we've heard the term being calm in the middle of chaos. When there is a loss of control, if you are reacting to that with toxicity and anger and frustration, then what you are in the middle of that is an agent of chaos, not a calm in the middle of chaos. You might as well as a firefighter might as well just walk into a scene carrying cans of gasoline if you're going to exhibit toxicity within this context. And it is very important to recognize that the one thing that you have control over is you. And if you try to exert control over your circumstances or other people, it does not go well. But when you can exert control over yourself, you can be a much greater influence in the macro and in the micro.
It does take a lot of practice and self-restraint and control, but I've noticed the more you keep working at it, the easier it gets.
And just like you said in your 20s, which I would assume anyway, you're in your 20s.
That's nice of you, but she's not. That's nice of you.
But I was the same. One of the reasons why that I'm thriving now in what I'm doing is because I didn't try to do this when I was in my 20s. I mean, I might have been able to create some success like other creators do when they behave in a reactionary and toxic manner, but you simply cannot sustain that. You have to look at this as in the terms of a finite pursuit or an infinite pursuit. In a finite pursuit, you can enter this forum guns a-blazing, but you can't sustain that forever. But if you think about the infinite game and what you're trying to build and trying to establish something that will last, then there has to be a mature perspective. You have to be able to sit with criticism. You have to accept the growth opportunities, and you have to take a beat before you respond to some things.
I'm going to plug this guy until I finally get him on the show. So shameless plug here. I learned a lot of that through actually a podcaster and a TikTok star. You may have heard of him, you may not have, but he's hundreds of thousands of followers. But his name's Jefferson Fisher. He's a lawyer in Texas, and he does a 15-minute podcast every week on just communication. And some of his communication tactics have helped tremendously in portraying that kindness to people, because he as well is all about kindness in the way that we communicate. And one of the things that I learned that has been so overly effective when you talk about kindness and communicating with people is to let my breath be my first word. If I'm going into a conversation, to take that breath, let myself, take that beat, as you said, and to take a step back and go, okay, how can I approach this just very quickly in my mind? And I love that guy's work. Check it out. But you mentioned something, Jimmy, that I want to kind of talk about. You said, when did you get into EMS? Because you said you weren't, you were an electrician. Is that right? Did I see one of your videos that said you were an electrician?
Yeah.
So you didn't get into this like a lot of us do in our early or our late teens, early 20s. You came in at a latter time in your life.
Yeah. I was 35 when I went to EMT school.
Wow. Wow. That's bold, Jimmy. That is. So why the change? This is not a job interview. I'm just curious for my own.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I never picked being an electrician. I, like a lot of people in their early 20s who didn't go to college, just kind of backed into a career. It was one that I had an aptitude for, so I thrived in it. But at some point or another, particularly after my grandfather died of cancer, where he expressed a little bit of regret that after World War II, he wasn't really able to finish up his college education to become an agricultural veterinarian like he wanted to be. He ended up becoming a plumber. I mean, he was proud of the life that he had. He had a goal and he never followed up on that goal. And that really bothered me. And I felt superimposed into my life after that, and purposeless. And I wasn't gratified. And I wanted to do something that not only mattered to me, but mattered to the community. And so I took an EMT course on a whim, thinking that at least if I could volunteer in the community and do something, it would be meaningful and it would serve the community. But I fell in love with anatomy and physiology and pathophysiology. I just got the concept of medicine. And so I never looked back.
That's awesome. I think that's a very interesting journey you've had. That's almost unheard of to hear a 35-year-old going to EMT school. I remember my EMT school, we had one guy who was, I think he was 46 or 47, and he was just there to get the credit to go into, like, I think radiology tech or something like that. And he is now, but it's really unheard of to see somebody of that age going through EMT school. I have helped adjunct instruct a few times. And one of the things that always just blows my mind is how I still think, and my mind still thinks, my body has proven me wrong numerous times, that I'm a young guy. So when I go into adjunct instruct and there's a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-olds, I'm like, who are these children that I thought I was coming to a college and not, but yeah, it's kind of odd to see the elderly in a EMT class.
The elderly. Wow.
I'm kidding.
There was a few of us, I went to EMT school and then intermediate EMTI, which was I-99.
Yeah.
So we could, that was North Carolina, we could intubate and all the stuff. And then paramedic school. There was a few of us in each one of those classes that were, like over the age of 30, and some that were like in their 50s. But what I noticed was that the older students, the ones who were established in their lives already, there was no middle ground there. You were either a thriver because of your maturity, or you were so stuck in your ways that you simply could not. You just didn't have the tools to be able to adapt to something new. So there was younger students there who, they were all over the place. There were some who were thrivers, some who couldn't cut it, but a lot more were right in the middle there, where some were just putting in a little bit more effort than others. With my age, you either were a high performer or a very low performer.
And clearly you were a high performer, I'm sure.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, based on the content you share, you're an intelligent guy. I'm always impressed by how deep you can go so quickly. There is a physiologic level to what you teach that sometimes can get pretty deep on what you're talking about, and you do it in such a quick amount of time, but in a way people can understand. And that's one of the things that I enjoy about watching your video, or videos rather. That's just an amazing concept to me. And then when you kind of branch off and talk about things that are not necessarily healthcare and A&P related, I guess, I feel like it may take some by surprise, but I absolutely love those videos where you're talking about some of the mental health stuff. And especially, there's one that you do talk about brokenness. I mentioned it before, but do you think that EMS attracts broken people? Do you think that this profession, or not just EMS, but public service in general, tends to attract what we think of as broken people? Do you think there's a reason for that?
I think when people have a brokenness within them, depending on what is behind that trauma, that public service tends to be a way that you can exert control over something. It's a catharsis. There's an ongoing catharsis for a lot of people who have experienced trauma in their lives. And there's There's some people that really need the stimulation. There's some people that need to have an emotional connection that is an intense emotional connection to other people. And so being in a situation where there is a lot of heavy and very intense emotion is important to them. There are some people that need a lot of sympathetic stimulation and need to live in that heightened space. And so something like EMS or fire or law enforcement serves that purpose. But, I'll be perfectly frank that I have a lot of trauma from growing up. I had a very, very traumatic childhood and went through some very difficult circumstances. And, being able to be in a position where you are able to care for others and express empathy for them and to connect to them on an emotional level in some circumstances, I think is a very natural extension of trauma that you suffer. I mean, to give you an example, I have, I'm a pediatric critical care paramedic, so I see plenty of pediatric trauma and bad ends in pediatrics, and we've all seen that in our career, drownings and, pediatric cardiac arrest, that sort of thing. I've seen the worst thing that you can see, but that hasn't been the worst grief that I've experienced. I can remember working a cardiac arrest on a gentleman who just a few minutes before was just doing his thing. He had end-stage cancer, so they knew he was kind of towards the end, but he wanted a cardiac arrest. We worked him. We called it on scene. We did the best that we could, but he was in his 90s, and he and his wife had been married for 80 years.
Wow.
Like they were both like 17 when they got married. And once we called it, she kind of got down on the floor with him and just started, the tears were flowing, and she was just like caressing his hair and just saying, I've lost half of myself. And that devastated me. It was some of the worst trauma that I've felt in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about living a full life with someone who has just become an extension of yourself, and now it's suddenly gone. And I think that sort of stuff connects me to trauma from when I was a child, where important things, important developmental aspects, important familial aspects were just taken from me, and I felt like I was functioning without a necessary part of myself. And so I can see how people who experience trauma thrive in these environments, because it allows them a catharsis and a window into that trauma.
I also think it tends to, just piggybacking off what you said, I think trauma tends to give us a greater insight on how to reply. And I say that because also we work in pediatrics, and I have a lot of trauma in my childhood as well. I tend to lean more towards the pediatric psych, because a lot of the emotional problems, and I know some people don't understand, behavioral issues come from pain. And kids don't know how to always cope with that, so they act out, or they project pain and anger, and they find different ways. I was the angry kid, so it resonates with me. And usually, people are like, "Hey, you guys are gonna go pick this kid up," and they've had security down here. And I've gone to pick up a kid. They've had 9 security guards down here. They've punched and hit everywhere. I'm like, okay, well, are you sure you want to do it? Yeah, I do. I've never had a problem. As soon as you're kind and show empathy and understanding, hey man, what's going on? Talk to me. I'm here for you. I'm not here to hurt you. That breaks down so many walls. And when you can, sometimes, they feel alone, and it's nice to be able to talk and say, hey, I know this feels really bad right now, but I can understand your story, and you kind of personalize and relate with them. I went through that too. And it also gives them hope, because they're like, you're doing this now. And I said, yeah, and you can too.
Yeah.
And it gives them hope. And I love that. I love to give kids hope, and it's almost healing in my own heart, like wishing that I had that as a kid myself. But like just knowing that I could give that and be that person to somebody else, it almost closes those holes for me.
Yeah, there's almost a euphoria that comes along with joining someone at the last rung of a ladder and
Mm-hmm.
being a part of, maybe they're not climbing up those rungs, but you are at least reinforcing their grip there and helping them think about, let's just talk about what the next right thing is, rather than let's not focus on all of your circumstances right now. Let's just talk about what the next right thing is for you. And there's something incredibly gratifying in that process. Yeah.
And that approach is so beautiful in its existence to me, that we can secure somebody on just that rung. just hold on where you are. And I think that's kind of the goal for this particular show, is that we give people a platform where we're just securing your grip on the rung. What's the next right step? That's beautiful. Just in its core, just to say, here's a space for you to see that others have struggled with the same things, have experienced the same things, and you're not alone. You're not by yourself. We are here, and look at all the people that have experienced very similar things to you. I remember when I went through the event that really started my PTSD. Looking back now, it was, even though I inwardly knew that other people probably go through this too, I didn't have anybody to tell me a story. I didn't have anybody to say, and I don't know how religious you are, but when you're going through church related trainings and religious trainings, they always tell you to connect first. Don't just come out and you're going to hell and that sort of thing. But it's the same principle here, in the sense of, if you connect with somebody on a deep level, and if you can tell the story of what happened in your life or in the lives of others, or things that you know about, it really secures that person. It really tightens that grip, if you will. And Kim always loved the psych patients. Me, on the other hand, that was my least favorite patient. Made me uncomfortable. Still does. I can go on a psych call today, and I just am uncomfortable with it. But one of the things that really drew me into the mentality of, this is for, this attracts that broken person, or that person that has that trauma, like we all have, and we've all admitted to having. One of the things that really does it for me is that I get to be something for somebody that I never had. And that was always the pull for me, was that I didn't have a great mom. I didn't have somebody that supported me all the time. I can be that support, at least in a momentary way, for my patients, for these kids, for whatever the patient demographic that I'm seeing is. I can always be that for somebody. So that really resonated with me.
Yeah. There's a phrase that I was thinking about when you were talking about that, which is, hungry bellies have no ears. And that would be applicable to the way that you interact with patients, and it's applicable to the mental state of EMS providers. But when you're interacting with these patients, particularly these patients who are experiencing psychological problems, some sort of mental trauma, mental illness, if you're not focusing first on what their needs are, they simply are not going to respond to you at all. They are sensing that there is a battle for control. And if they sense instead that you are trying to feed them or meet a need, then they can become receptive. And the same thing for EMS providers. When I say hungry bellies have no ears, if you're not acknowledging, the current state of EMS in general, and EMS providers in general, and the individual in general, if you're not acknowledging that state, they cannot become responsive to, a message of wellness and holistic approaches to medicine and kindness.
I know most of our listeners have probably seen this and heard this. One of the big sound bites for us that have got the most views for us on our page was a snippet from you talking about the state of EMS. And there are near 100 comments on that, back and forth. And really elaborate on where you think EMS is, because I think EMS in general is tired. We're overwhelmed. We're overworked. We're struggling with mental health issues. We're struggling with pay and education. And that's kind of been the conversation back and forth on that particular clip, where you kind of say EMS is kind of in a dire state.
I do think EMS is in a dire state. And I think that what you just said, EMS is tired, all of that stuff, is very much the problem, which is that this has now become tied to our identity. The tiredness, the fatigue, the mental health struggles, the substance abuse struggles, the suicidal ideations, the trauma that we've gone through, it has become our identity, to the degree that people are actually castigated for attempting to impact it. Like, when you try to show a better way, or talk about a better way, talk about how the only thing we can do is control ourselves, and starting to make a decision to be more kind, to be more holistic in the way we approach our patients and our patient care. It's not a message that EMS wants to hear, because we become so married to the trauma, has become so ingrained into our EMS DNA. And, we have started to welcome the saying, it's okay to not be okay. We actually need to start recognizing that it's okay to be okay, that the goal is not to be here. The goal is to do something else. The biggest problem is that every problem in EMS, every individual problem, is directly related to every other individual problem in EMS. And so when you talk about fixing things, there is no one thing that you can fix that makes things better, because they are all directly interlocked with each other. And it is almost at critical mass. It either has to There either has to be a radical paradigm change, or it has to be just left to implode and we build ourselves up out of the ashes. And I feel like that the latter is something that we're heading towards.
I would tend to agree with you.
So obviously Kevin is a friend and also a leader now. And we do have a lot of honest conversations back and forth since he is newer into leadership, and he's really receptive to feedback. And I know myself and a lot of my coworkers really appreciate that, the open-mindedness and wanting to be different, because I would say our whole leadership team is a lot different than any other leaders I've experienced in my 14 years in healthcare. A lot of leaders previously, they kind of, this is my way and this is how it's going to be. And if you don't like it, find somewhere else to work. And they kind of take approach with us to work together and listen and be empathetic and at least hear our side, even if we're wrong and we're not going to make a change of it. It's always done respectfully, and we at least have a voice. And so that's really, really appreciated. From your perspective, how could leaders like Kevin and others within EMS foster an environment where we talk about mental health and normalize it rather than see it as a weakness? And what steps could agencies take to make that happen from your perspective?
That is a sticky wicket, because
What?
a sticky wicket meaning that when you start breaking it down, it comes convoluted in itself.
Never heard that terminology. Sorry.
there is no way to approach that in an organized fashion where there is an action plan at the end. I mean, I think we just have to acknowledge that, because managers are not psychologists. They're not psychiatrists. They're not mental health experts. Even our critical incident stress debriefing teams, all they are is a pressure release outlet. And so the notion that we as an industry, without outside help, can come up with some sort of process that deflates this balloon is absurd. We actually need consultation. We need outside consultation to start evaluating the state of EMS and the mental health state of EMS to come up with that sort of solution. It is important to give opportunities for people to have a pressure release. I actually posted something on Facebook a day or two ago about managers needing to be out there talking to their people and being unafraid of talking to their people and actually demonstrating that they care about their people. All that's important. I say that not to be dismissive of it, but there's a lot of people out there that don't give a shit that their managers give a shit about them, because they don't see it. They don't see it prove out in what they're doing on a daily basis. And so, a manager going out there and saying, how you doing? That sort of thing. How's your mental health state? Okay, well, you are working me into the ground. That's my mental health state. So I don't care if you know the names of my children. So I don't know what the through line is there, other than that we need, as an industry, professional help that comes from the outside.
I think that you're exactly right. I think that we are not, even though some days being a leader feels like you're a counselor, psychiatrist, psychologist, but that's not the role of a leader. We've got to have outside help. And it's really coming about now that we're getting more and more trauma trained counselors that are specializing in first responder healthcare, mental health, that really is becoming a specialty. And I'm seeing more and more, especially with the A Silent War Within TikTok page. I guess my For You page has kind of recognized what we are, because I'm getting those specialists that are former law enforcement, fire, EMS, that have now started down the path of, whether it's coaching, whether it's going to school for your psychology degree, and then going on to get certified as one of these counselors. I think it's moving in the right direction. I just don't think we're fast enough to stop the collapse that will eventually happen, and then we'll have to build from the ashes. I don't think we're quick enough.
No. Have you guys ever seen I Love Lucy?
Of course. Yeah.
the very famous clip where they're working in the chocolate factory and they're having, they can't keep up on that conveyor belt and like stuffing the chocolate in their mouth and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We could come up with a very elegant way for approaching mental health in EMS. But the problem is that there is a conveyor belt of people being fed to us that are all suffering from the same delusion, which is that we are here to run lights and sirens at specific times throughout the day, to rush to a scene and do something heroic to save someone's life. And every person who comes through on that conveyor belt is just objectively disappointed when they get here, because that is not the paradigm we exist in. That is not what we do.
No.
Most of what we do is we serve as an entry point for someone who has experienced something abnormal in their health state. We serve as an entry point into the healthcare system. And if you want to talk about one thing that we can do to improve this process, is to start where this mindset develops, which is in the EMT class, and start being honest with those students about what their life is going to be like, because we are creating our own problem.
That's a good outlook. I think that you have such a fantastic voice, not just in the AMP space and EMS, but I think you just have a fantastic voice in general, but more so just the way that you present information is easy. The way that you have talked to us today is very easy. It's very conversative. It's very easy to listen to. You do have a great actual voice, though. Your physical voice is fantastic. But I do think that to other EMS and first responders, healthcare that might be listening or feeling overwhelmed, what's the message of hope? What can we give to people? What can you, EMS Avenger, and Kevin and Kim from A Silent War Within give to people to kind of demonstrate that, we can acknowledge we're not in a good place, but what's the hope there? What's the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess?
Well, I think that when you start to take care of yourself, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Right? When you start to take care of yourself, you start to see opportunity. When you take care of yourself, you start having dopamine releases, you start releasing your own endorphins, and you start feeling positive. And when you feel positive, you feel motivated. So you have to start taking care of yourself. That's the hope. That is the only hope, because in a profit-driven healthcare system, the system is not going to take care of you. You are a disposable healthcare resource. This isn't political. I'm not going there. This is just reality. That's how capitalism works. There are consumers, and then there are people who are human resources as part of the consumer-driven market. And in that market, they don't care the way that you're affected by it. We just are trying to create profit. So in a profit-driven healthcare system, you are going to be consumed as a human resource. So you have to start taking care of yourself. You just have to.
That is great information and a great take on that. So tell us where we can find all your material. Where can we plug into EMS Avenger, and what's the next steps for you? What's the future hold?
Well, I'm on, as far as like the Reels format goes, you can find me on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, and I also upload them to YouTube Shorts. And then on Facebook also, I will post links to papers, or have some of my own thoughts that I post there, even just beyond Reels. So you can get a lot more if you follow me on Facebook, the EMS Avenger official Facebook page. You can get a lot more if you follow me there. The next step would be to be able to get CEUs from my content. And so that is the long-term goal. There are some things in the works. We'll see exactly what format that comes in, but I want to make it as easy for people as possible. It's been the number one request since I started my channel was, I wish I could get CEs for what you do. And so I want that too. And so that is the next thing.
That is awesome. Hopefully that comes to fruition, because that would be extremely helpful, especially for me, because we obviously have to research and do all kind of things. And probably most of the listeners have to do very similar things to research. Jimmy, this is the end of A Silent War Within. I thank you for being with us. This is episode 2. If you didn't listen to episode 1, it is strictly me and Kim. It is just about our struggles and the things that we faced and why this show was created. So make sure you go back and listen to that. Jimmy, thank you for all your responses and everything that you've given us today. A lot of great information here. So we appreciate you being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And as always, you can find us on TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, same places you can find EMS Avenger. You can also reach out to us anytime, asilentwarwithin@gmail.com. silentwarwithin.com. That's a whole word, a silent war within, no spaces. So that's important. The email won't make it if you put spaces. But again, just find us where you can find us at. We're always posting things. We're always highlighting some of our guests. You'll see a lot more content coming out from us in the following week. Remember, this episode has been released August 1st, and there's 4 with it, so you can listen to those 4 in this week, and then every Friday after that, you'll see an episode released from us. Like I said, we've got some fantastic guests. I'm so excited to interview some of these guys, but we appreciate you joining us today and listening to us wherever you're listening to us at, whether it's in your car, or work, or at home. We're just so happy that you're with us, and we hope that we can continue to give you a safe space to land here on A Silent War Within. And as always, we'll close our show with our phrase that Kim has coined that I just love. Kim, go ahead.
Until next time, be safe, take care of your mind, and we'll talk soon. Take care,
All right,
everybody.
goodbye, everybody.
You've been listening to A Silent War Within. If this episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, you're not alone and your well-being matters. It's time to end this silent war.